I am fortunate to have worked with Kerry James Marshall at Rutgers University, where he was invited to make an edition of prints at the Rutgers Center for Innovative Print and Paper. It is my pleasure, after 4 long years of nagging, to have lassoed him to come speak with us here in Boston. Best known for his large-scale paintings and sculptures, Kerry James brings his own unique past and life experiences to his work. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, he received his BFA degree from the Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles. He has said, "You can't be born in Birmingham, Alabama, grow up in South Central Los Angeles near the Black Panther headquarters, and not feel like you've got some kind of special social responsibility." Using a broad range of art historical references, from Renaissance painting to Black folk art, Kerry explores the ambiguity surrounding the representation of African Americans in our culture and investigates the invisibility of Blacks in America. His work is large-scale and beautiful, and is not only formally rigorous, but socially engaging. Kerry James has work in many collections worldwide, including the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Chicago Art Institute, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, and has been included in such prestigious venues as Documenta 10 in Kassel, Germany, the Venice Biennale, the Whitney Biennial, and the FransHals Museum in Haarlem, the Netherlands. In 1997, Kerry James Marshall was awarded the prestigious John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation grant. He lives in Chicago with his wife, the actress Cheryl Lynn Bruce, who is with us this evening as well. Please join me in welcoming Kerry James Marshall.
Oh, okay, well, you see, persistence pays off. And you can say, Lynn is nothing if not persistent. Well, anyway, thank you all for coming out. We're gonna go on a kind of wild ride, and my wife, who is sitting here, tells me, I only have 25 minutes. It's like at 25 minutes, she's gonna give me the hook. Tell me to stop talking, because once I get rolling, I have a tendency to kind of go on and on and on. And because I think there's a lot that needs to be said. And so what I'm going to start with before I show the first slide is to sort of set up, there are 5 questions that I think are really important to ask. And these are questions that are not peculiar to what artists do, but I think they have a lot to do with the way in which you want to live your life in the world and the kind of world you want to live your life in. And these 5 questions, I think, are really pertinent. But what I experienced was nobody ever asked me or told me I need to ask myself these questions. So when I started art school back in 1977, when I went to the Otis Art Institute, I had no idea really what the possibilities for me were going to be. Because nobody really framed what the possibilities of living in life as an artist were. And I grew up like a lot of people back then with all of those old-fashioned notions about what it meant to be an artist, meaning in some ways that you were going to work in relative obscurity for almost all your life, and that only after you passed away would somebody sort of take an interest in your work, and then your reputation, if you were to develop one, would start its ascendancy. So I always thought when I began that I would never make a dollar making artwork, and that I would spend my life as a laborer, basically, and do the artwork that I wanted to do on the side, because that was the thing that I felt most excited about and most interested in. But here are these 5 questions I think everybody needs to ask. And again, the first question really is, why is the world the way it is, and who says it should be so? That's the most important question anybody can ask. Why is the world the way it is, and who says it should be so? And then from there, if you want to be an artist, then the question is, what is this art thing all about? What's at stake? What do you want as an artist who means to participate in it? And what is it that you can do to determine or to guarantee that you achieve the kinds of things that you set out to achieve for yourself. So those questions are the questions I began to ask myself literally when I entered school at Otis. And the thing that motivated me, that drove me to ask those questions, because when I applied to school at the Otis Art Institute back in 1977, that was back in the day when you used to have to take real work, original work, to the school and drop it off, and the committee that would evaluate it would evaluate original work. They didn't use slides and photographs and things like that. So I dropped my work off, and as I was leaving the building, going through the parking lot, I ran into a student who was in graduate school there, and this was an African-American student. And he asked me, "Oh, did you just drop your portfolio off to be reviewed?" And I said, "Yeah." And he asked me, "Well, what did you put in it?" And I said, "Well, I put in a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I put in a few things because I wanted to really show the people on the committee all the different kinds of things I was interested in and the kinds of things that I could do." So there was a little watercolor, some drawing, some paint, all of those different things. And he said to me, after I said it, he said, "Oh, man," he said, "you just messed up. So you just screwed up." Because that's not what they want to see. They don't want to see that you can do a little bit of this and that you can do a little bit of that you have all these skills. What they want is a series of things that have a kind of consistency in it, that, in a sense, mirrors what is taking place in the marketplace. And he said, "Oh, you brought all this stuff. You probably won't get in." And so for about a month, my heart was in my throat. I was so nervous and so scared that I had screwed up my chance of getting into that school. And that was the school I had always dreamed of being a part of ever since I was 14 years old. So I thought I'd blown my chance. And so I'm sitting around every day looking at the mailbox, waiting for my rejection letter to come in the mail. And the day that the letter came, I was so nervous I could barely even open it. I almost tore the thing apart, tore it up trying to get the envelope open because I thought it was going to be a rejection, and I got in. But when I got into school at Otis, I ended up so disappointed because all of the things that I thought I was needing to go to school to learn were things they had stopped teaching at that time. Because I started school in 1977 at Otis, and if you know anything about the history of modern and contemporary art, you know in 1977 was a period in which conceptual art had really come to dominate in the academy. And there was a department that was called intermedia, in which people did performance art, people did conceptual art, people did video, people did things like that. And so, and all of the people who had been teaching these things they called traditional art forms, like painting and drawing and sculpture and representational work and stuff like that, all of those people were, the people who were in the intermedia department were actively trying to get rid of all of those other sort of conventional and traditional teachers. So all of the things that I went to school to learn were things that nobody was teaching anymore. And so I spent 2 years at the Otis Art Institute essentially being a part of the social scene. Playing volleyball, playing ping pong, playing all those things, which were a lot of fun to do, and meeting a lot of people that I really liked. But not really learning any of the things that I went to school to learn. And as a consequence, I decided when I graduated from Otis with my BFA that I wouldn't go on to graduate school because I determined at that time that the whole educational enterprise as it related to artists was a complete fraud. And then I left deciding that I was going to prove that you could achieve all of the things that the certification of a Master's of Fine Arts degree said you could achieve without having to go through the conventional protocols. That there had to be another way around having that degree, and that the way around it had to have something to do with the work you did. And so when you start to see the things that I'm going to show, this is the story that the work is going to tell. And so when it comes to this question of what's at stake, one of the things I think we have to really come to terms with is, in the art world, is that there are multiple art worlds in which to operate. I know that person right there. There are multiple art worlds in which to operate. And one has to decide which one of these art worlds you mean to be a part of. And once you decide which one of those art worlds you want to be a part of, then what's at stake in those art worlds is what's set for you. And for me, the part of the art world that I always wanted to be a part of was the art world that is represented by a book like this. It's Art of the 20th Century, or this latest iteration of these surveys is Art Since 1900, which is the last, one of the newest comprehensive art history surveys written by what people call the October Gang. You know, you have Hal Foster and Rosalind Krauss and Yves Allenbois, all those people who contributed to that. Oh, yeah, let me turn, sorry about that, so you can see that a little bit better. But this book, and then this is the cover of a book on conceptual art, a comprehensive survey of conceptual art. And the reason why I decided I wanted to be a part of this art game, or this area of the art world, is because this is where it seems to matter the most. Because whenever you go to the library and you pick up books that survey what has the achievements that have been made in the art world, this is the place where you find them. When I went to the library and I picked up books, what was I looking at? I was looking at Rembrandt, I was looking at Leonardo da Vinci, I was looking at Michelangelo, I was looking at Giotto, looking at all of those artists from the Renaissance up to the present, all of those artists whose work is represented in these books as evidence of the things that matter the most. And when you're looking at books like that, for me, one of the things I was early on understood was that there was nobody like me represented in almost any of those books, which and the implications of that must be that there are no people who are like you who do anything or have done anything that really matters. Certainly that didn't matter enough to be included in the narrative of art that was laid out by any of these books that we go to the library to pick up, or that you are introduced to when you take an art history survey class in your college courses. And so this whole notion of the absence of the representation of black people as makers and as significant players in the historical narrative of art was the thing that sort of drove me. And coupling that with the experience that I had at Otis, in applying to school at Otis, where I'm scared to death that I'm going to be judged not to be good enough to be invited to go to school at a place like Otis, made me understand that you cannot leave in the hands of other people the decisions about what you achieve and where you fit in to the larger narrative of the enterprise that you claim to be devoting your life to. And so what I set out to do was to understand what it is about the artists who are in these books that has made their position there so secure and so important. And so I spent a lot of time reading biographies of artists and reading the things that other people had to say about them, trying to find out what the secret was of their success, essentially. And what I'm going to read to you one thing right now, which I think encapsulates the drive and the motivation that I think leads people to end up in a survey like this. And this is from an article that was in Art News Annual magazine from 1968. It was an issue they did on the avant-garde, or the neo-avant-garde. And there was an essay in there on Seurat that was titled The Neo-Impressionist Avant-Garde. And here's the thing that the writer of that article said about Seurat, and then he quotes something that Seurat himself says. And what he says is, Seurat has often been taken to task for his hypersensitivity, for his concern to point out on every occasion that he was the first to create optical painting. The history of 20th century art has accustomed us since then to these quarrels over priority. For the first time, the artist lays claim to a date at the same time that he invents. This is fascinating testimony not only to Seurat's consciousness of the role he was playing in the evolution of art history, but also to his confidence in his technique. Thus, Seurat dreaded to see his secrets divulged. And what Seurat says is this: the more of us there are, the less original we will be. And the day when everybody will be using this technique, it will have no more value, and we shall have to go on seeking again. He says, it is my right to think this and to say it. Since I, as a painter, since the reason I was making these paintings was to find something new, a mode of painting that would be my own. Now, this is something that Seurat was saying at the end of the 19th century. But if we think that was the end of this sort of egocentric and maybe megalomaniacal sort of tendency that I think artists really do have, all you have to do is remember some things that Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein were saying in the late 60s relative to the development of pop art. And there's a great article, if you care to go and look it up, that was in American Heritage magazine from back in about 1998 or so. It was called How Pop Turned the Art World Upside Down. And in there's a quote. There are quotes from Warhol and quotes from Roy Lichtenstein. And the author of the article says one thing that really sort of drives the point home. The first thing he says is, in the entire history of pop art, there are only two artists whose work matters. Everybody else is an also-ran. And those two artists, he says, are Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein. But when he goes to quoting what Warhol and Lichtenstein themselves said about the work they were doing, for Warhol, he says, because if you remember in your historical research, you know that Andy Warhol was painting comic book images too, at the same time that Roy Lichtenstein was painting comic book images in the early 60s. And Warhol says, when I saw Roy Lichtenstein's comic book images, I knew they were much better than mine. And so I had to find another direction to go in, a direction in which I would come out first. And Roy Lichtenstein says, when I started painting the comic book images, I started painting them because there was no space for me between Milton Resnick and all of the other second-generation abstract painters who were working at the time. That if he kept making those kinds of pictures, then he would be as inconsequential as the vast majority of them. And that mirrors something that I know Chuck Close spoke here at some point. But Chuck Close, I remember Chuck Close had said, well, when I first started painting after school, I had painted more, he says, I was so in love with de Kooning, I had painted more de Kooning paintings than de Kooning had. He said, but then I realized when he started showing work, he said, I never wanted anybody to come out of an exhibition asking, was there Chuck Close work in that show? So I had to figure out a strategy for doing the work that would draw attention to myself and make sure that people understood that I had work that was there, that work that was distinct, or as Seurat said, a painting that I could call my own. So this sort of sets the stakes. It's like, well, what is it that artists really want? Well, what artists want is, one, to be recognized for having achieved something that was meaningful in extending the narrative of or the life of the mode of representation or work that they are invested in. So that if there is a long history of painting that goes all the way back to you could say the cave paintings up till the contemporary moment, in which a considerable amount of magnificent work has been done, where are you going to situate yourself in relationship to that? Because what you really want is to be, it's like at the end of the chapter on contemporary painting, you want to be in the next chapter that is rendered for that subject. Otherwise, then you are relegated to the oblivion of history as a kind of non-entity. And so for me, and for a lot of African American artists, the absence of African American artists in those historical narratives, and I'm not saying that the two books that I showed are completely void of representations of black painters. In the Art of the 20th Century by Taschen, Jean-Michel Basquiat is in there as a painter, and Gordon Parks is in there as a photographer. In the Art Since 1900, there are African American artists represented, David Hammons, Fred Wilson, a couple of people, but when do they come into the narrative of art? Well, they come into the narrative of art around the time when multiculturalism and identity politics becomes a factor in the way museums and institutions start to talk about the narrative of painting. But that's a special kind of case. None of those artists have a secure position in that historical narrative outside of questions of multiculturalism and identity politics. They don't have the same kind of place that, let's say, somebody like Richard Serra has. They don't have the same kind of place in history as somebody like Ed Reinhardt had. They don't have a secure enough place. It only comes in under special circumstances. And a lot of those artists, and a lot of African American artists who, for one period in art history, rejected representation in favor of abstraction as a device for eliminating the questions of identity politics in their work. A lot of those artists who rejected the notion of representation only have presence and representation in books that are designated or dedicated to the study of and representation of African American art. So this is the Samela Lewis's book, revised edition on African American art and artists. So, but for their representation in that, many of those artists would have no representation in the historical narrative at all. And so the challenge that artists face is how do you bridge the gap so that you are not only just represented in a kind of special section, say multiculturalism and identity politics, or represented in a special publication such as African American art and artists. How do you bridge the gap and enter into the dominant narrative of art history in a meaningful way that is secure, that is not determined by the generosity of somebody who had found some sort of way to include you. And so, and if you're thinking about things like this, if these are the kinds of stakes that you're playing for, then that shapes the direction and the approach that you take to the kind of work you make. And I'm gonna show a lot of stuff. I'm not gonna talk about them because I've used up most of my 25 minutes. And I got a lot to say. So what I'm gonna do like a blitzkrieg. I'm gonna go a rapid fire through a lot of stuff, stopping only momentarily. But what you'll see from the variety of kinds of things that I'm gonna show is something about the way I think about what I do and its relationship to art history, and then I'll tell you at the end what I ultimately hope to achieve as a result of it. So, anyway, but I'm gonna fire through these. This is when you think about art history, this is what you think about. These are the kinds of images you're used to seeing. This is what art history looks like. It still looks like that, by and large. And even when you come to pop culture, this is a great book that Taschen published called The Great American Pinup. But this is also one of those cases where there's not one single black figure in that entire book. And that's like the definitive collection of pinup imagery in American painting. Not one single. And so, whereas that might not mean anything to somebody, it means a lot to me. And so for me, I have to do something about that. And John Brown is emblematic on one level of the kind of things you have to do. You have to have a revolution of a certain sort, meaning that you cannot take for granted that the way things are the way they're supposed to be. And then you can't take for granted the fact that the way things are now is the way they must remain, and that there's nothing that you can do to transform the situation. I'm not going to talk about these people. Except to say This man was, John Brown and this man, they go together. This is Dangerfield Newby, who was was a black man who was with John Brown at Harper's Ferry when they did the raid on the National Guard Armory at Harper's Ferry. He was the first man killed in the raid. And the reason why he's important is because, for me, it says something about stakes. Because here was a free black man who risked everything to join up with John Brown to go back to try and free his wife and his kids who were still enslaved. And so it has always sort of fascinated me, and I'm interested in what it is that causes people who have achieved certain amounts of success to put all of that on the line in order to achieve something that is even bigger than the thing that they have achieved so far. So that's what a figure like him represents. And I made a painting about Dangerfield Newby. This painting is called Oh, Dear Dangerfield, back in about 1984, 85 or something like that. So anyway, but now let me run through a couple of things, and then we'll have some time to talk. This is just going to give you a kind of a sense of a kind of an overview. Oops, this is probably going to go too fast. Wait. Okay, and these are this painting and the next painting are two relatively new paintings. This is Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein. And we'll talk about that later. This is a pin-up, this is a pin-up. But so now, now I can speed up. And I'll just give you a brief thing. This is John Punch, portrait of these are a series of fictional portraits. John Punch, who I'll tell you in the Q&A. David Walker, if anybody knows who David Walker is, wrote an interesting pamphlet in 1829, I think 1839, which was a critique of the Declaration of Independence and analysis of the condition of black people in the United States. Julian Carlton. Scipio Moorhead. You'll see a group of paintings that are about the image of the painter, self-representation. They sort of speak for themselves in a way, but I'll talk about that a little bit later too. This is the first of a group of paintings that are called Vignettes, which these works are a part of that group. There's a whole series of those. The first part of the group in Grisaille, which is like if you've been to the Metropolitan Museum, you know they have that Ang Grisaille in Odalisque in Grisaille. That's one of the most beautiful paintings ever made. It's phenomenal. So whenever you go to the Met, always go see that. Oh, I didn't get a picture there. So, and there are five of these I'm going to show in a row. It's a suite of five, and they comprise a 360-degree rotation around that couple, so you can see. Oops. And why is there's always a dark space in there? Let me see. They're blanks. I don't know why. There's a picture in there somewhere. Well, who is the tech guy? Where's the tech guy? There are 5 or 6 pictures that didn't show when I pushed the button. It was all black. I wonder why that's the case. But anyway, it went from grisaille to something in color. I don't know where those pictures went. And then if you get to New York from time to time, the Studio Museum in Haarlem did an exhibition called Black Romantic about 5 years ago, of which a group of these paintings are a response to this whole notion of the Black Romantic, a kind of black arts painting, seascapes. A black painting, sort of back to the black paintings like Ad Reinhardt, except the narrative painting in the mode. This is, I was in a show at Mass MoCA, of which this is that whole little corner. This is all the sculpture and the painting and the prints on the other wall. These are all mine, as well as those photographs on the other side too. And I'll get into why there's this sort of range and what each one of those things is about at some point. But I'm just going to go through so we don't run out of time. And then these are going back to some earlier works, where you can see how in the evolution of painting and painting processes, each one of these modes of working performs a very specific function. And they're all, it's like everything you do is to get you to another place. And you work on a thing until you realize you really understand the dynamics of a particular way of working. And for me, it's like at the moment in which I understand the dynamics of that particular way of working, then it's no longer useful to keep working like that, or no longer exciting to keep working like that. So you move on to try to keep pushing the boundary. But a part of what you're trying to do is really come to terms with all of the different ways in which painting operates, and the uses and the implications of painting those particular kinds of ways. Because ultimately you mean to do something in the end by way of synthesis that produces the Seurat Effect, we would say, where you can say that you can claim a kind of way of working or a kind of method or a kind of approach to representation that is your own. See, there are these dead zones. I don't know what that's about. And here, this particular painting, and I think the painting that preceded it, which was the one that was on the cover of the Samela Lewis book. Now, when my ambition as an artist, what was my ambition? When I was a kid and I was first taken on a trip to the LA County Art Museum in Los Angeles, my ambition was to be in that museum among all those other works that I used to go to the museum to admire. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be with those guys. And when the LA County Art Museum bought this painting, this was done in 1993, I think it was. But when the LA County Art Museum bought that painting, I had fulfilled all of my ambitions as an artist at that point. I had entered into the museum, and I entered into the museum on a set of terms that satisfied my interests and my needs. Because one of the things that I had discovered is that when you do find the work of African American artists in museums, oftentimes the work enters there at such a small and modest scale as to be easily overlooked, which in some ways is almost as good as not being there at all. And so, and it doesn't do the thing that Chuck Close says, like, I don't want people coming out of there asking, was there a Kerry Marshall in that place? So this painting, is a 10-foot by 10.5-foot painting. You walk past that, you can't not notice. You don't miss that. And so when you know it, when you see it, you know it's there. And for me, nothing transforms the expectations of people who go to the museum more than seeing an image like that in a space in which what you commonly expect to see were images like those earlier ones I showed, like the Renoir and like the Manet and things like that, where the history of representation and the history of art and the history of painting is almost exclusively the representation of white figures in pictorial spaces. And so when people think of what art is, that's what our expectation of what art is. But when you go to the museum now and you see an image that's with a figure like that, that radically transforms what you expect to see the next time you go to the museum. That's the way I see it. And for me, it's like I don't want to ever go to the museum and not see pictures of black people in there. And by extension, I don't think anybody else should. So anyway, that painting was called This Style. And I did a series of scouts, the Boy Scout, a Girl Scout. There was a Cub Scout, a Brownie. There was a Scoutmaster and a Den Mother. And this is a woodcut. It's the biggest woodcut I ever did. It's 48 feet, 8 feet by 48 feet. All hand printed. Insane. In color. My studio was only 300 square feet when I did that too, so it was fun to do. And I'll show some paintings. This is a project I did for the Carnegie International. I developed this comic project. It was based on newspaper comics, of which the first iteration was this installation at the Carnegie. But since then, it's sort of it's evolved into a thing called dailies, which is still based on newspaper comics. But the backstory of it is Rhythm Master is the overarching narrative. But in this Rhythm Master narrative, in the Dailies project, there are two other narratives that sort of comprise the project overall. One is called the P-Van, and the other one was called at one time was Ho Stroll, but now it's called On the Stroll. And it's formatted on the same size of a sheet of the full-size sheet of the Chicago Tribune, in which the comic sort of migrates around the page, just in a kind of shifting kind of terrain and fragmented narratives. So anyway, but this is a recent iteration. And so in each one of those narratives is has a different kind of story, a different kind of conversation, but they're all done in vernacular, in black vernacular speech. And a part of the reason for that is so that you can, because there are certain kinds of assumptions that people make about the kinds of things people who speak certain kinds of ways think about and talk about and do. And so when we hear people speaking in what we call black English, that's almost always associated with semi-literacy and a kind of undereducated class. But I think it makes a difference to have to speak in post-structuralist dialogues using black English. And so that's what happens in a lot of the Rhythm Master project. They're talking about a lot of the sort of post-structuralist and semiotic kind of discourse, but they're using vernacular English to do it. And part of the reason for that is because my studio is on the South Side in Chicago, and there's a guy in my neighborhood who sort of like he's a homeless guy, kind of squatting in some empty houses down the block. But he's my handyman, so he does a lot of stuff for me around the studio. And the thing is, like, you have a conversation with this guy. It's like, this guy knows everything about everything, it seems. He knows more about the neighborhood and more about the people that are in the area, more about the history than anybody else I know. And you underestimate the depth of knowledge and understanding and how insightful people can be if you simply take some of the superficial characteristics of what they are and what they do and how they speak. If you take those things as being what they really are, that you will miss so much. So anyway, and as you see on the whole stroll, just like part of that, women just sort of, they wander around, they walk around the comic strip talking about stuff. All right, so you sort of see how that works. And then I did a project at the Wexner Center where I took the Rhythm Master project and I did it as a Bunraku puppet performance, of which this is the installation. This used the puppets as kind of sculpture after the performance. And I had 23 high school kids from Columbus, Ohio, who worked with me, and they got to learn how to operate the puppets, and they did the narration and everything. So this is one of the characters. This is the set with some of the other puppets. And they're all the characters, the power figures from the Rhythm Master narrative. This is one of the female characters in there. And then we'll go back to some paintings. I'm not gonna see these dead spots. We missed a lot. Oh, see now, I have no idea. Anyway, some more photographs. I did a series of photographs. This is a photograph in my studio, but I did a series of photographs shot under ultraviolet light, which is called black light, as a part of an exhibition I did at the MCA called One True Thing, Meditations on Black Aesthetics, in which I sort of look at all of the implications of and all of the different manifestations of the idea of blackness. Meaning in the quality of the light, the subjectivity of it, some formal issues relative to the way groups of black people in my neighborhood occupy space. I mean, all of these implications of it connected to the idea of the black arts movement from the 70s, asking the question that was the idea of the black arts movement and the black aesthetic, was that a failed proposition, or is it a proposition that is simply unfulfilled? Now, if you take the word of the critical establishment, they would say it was doomed from the outset to failure because there could be no such thing. But if we go back to the question that I asked in the beginning, why is the world the way it is, and who says it should be so? It's like there's nothing that anybody says that is not open for debate, up for question, and should not always be challenged. Because it's like, well, if people claim that they know, how is it that they know what they claim to know? And then they need to be able to demonstrate exactly what the terms of judgment are they use in order to arrive at the conclusions they make. And so as artists, this is the last, I'm not going to show any more after this. As artists, this is the challenge we have to face. Because here we are dealing in a domain in which subjectivity seems to be the dominant mode of analysis. And if that is the case, that for people who aspire to be artists, to kind of make their way in the world as artists, I think you cannot have other people in the world claiming to know more about what you're doing than you do. Because if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, who is it you are depending on to guarantee for you that you will achieve the kinds of things that you want to achieve? And who is it who is setting the agenda and deciding what kinds of things the discipline or the field needs to have in play in order for the field to be advanced beyond where it is at the moment you arrive? And so if the work that I've done in a way represents anything, and I think the variety of things that I do represent anything, is really trying to figure out how all of these different modes of representation work from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that once you understand how these modalities operate internally, then you can start to dissect them, and then you can start to reassemble them into synthetic configurations that had never been articulated before. And that's the only way you're going to be able to do the kind of thing that somebody like Seurat was saying, the kind of thing that Warhol was saying, the kind of thing that Roy Lichtenstein was saying, and the kind of thing that I think any artist that has any real ambition, I mean, to really be a part of this whole thing and to be a part of the extension of the narrative of art history, this is the only way, as far as I can tell, that you can achieve the kind of thing you achieve. And the thing that I think we tend to underestimate, because we sort of somehow see what we do as artists as a kind of special class of activity that's sort of separate from what other people in the world are doing, is that you don't realize, and I didn't realize it either until much later, that it's like, well, being an artist is not any different really than working at the post office. I mean, and when you go out into what we call the regular working world, you have to work, when you graduate from college at 25 years old, the system is set up in such a way that you have to work until you are 65 years old or 70 years old before you can retire and then collect your pension. That's 40 years. You've got to be productive for 40 years in order to secure for yourself a reasonably decent sort of retirement in old age. Well, the same thing is true if you're going to be an artist. I mean, you can't just make one good picture. You can't just have one good year. You can't just have one good show. You have to continually be having good shows, or good enough shows at least, to be able to secure a kind of life for yourself for 40 years. You have to be productive in a meaningful way for 40 years before you can really start to evaluate and decide whether or not you've actually succeeded at the thing that you set out to succeed. Because if you don't, if you can't maintain it, then where will you be? Well, you will certainly not be in any of those historical narratives. And as far as I'm concerned, if you take the stakes that you're playing for and you take the arena that you want to operate in, those are the highest stakes that can be achieved. To be a part of the historical narrative, that is the ultimate goal. That is the only thing that really matters. That is what I've been working for and what I continue to work for in my practice as an artist. And so, with that, I think I'm going to stop talking, and then maybe we'll open the floor for questions, and I hope there are more than a few. Thank you. We lost about a quarter of my pictures. Okay, so anybody have a question? Yeah.
Hi. I was just curious at your process. You seem to have a lot of symbols in your paintings, and how do you develop those symbols and your narratives for your own like personal stories and mythologies?
Well, I don't, you know what, the thing is like that, maybe that's an illusion that you're seeing. Because it's like, well, to the degree that you could say there are personal narratives and mythologies in there, well, I would say there aren't any. There are cultural narratives in the work. None of that work is about me, really. All of it is about the way in which images operate in the culture. And so, and when you look at some of in some of the paintings, you saw symbols that that don't look familiar or common. Well, a lot of those come from Haitian, Vodun. A lot of those symbols came from Yoruba religious imagery and ideas, because there are components to the African American community that still embrace an idea called Afrocentrism. And as Afrocentrists, a lot of people still practice what they understand to be the closest things to Yoruba-based religions they can. And if you look at religion from Brazil to Haiti to Cuba to Colombia, all of the places where black folks had been taken as slaves for the plantations, there are vestiges of African-based religious practices and cultural practices still alive in those places. And so that's where those emblems come. And so that's a way of linking up from African Americans to Africans in the diaspora writ large. So that's why a lot of those cultural symbols are. But in the larger sense of the world, I'm really not making pictures for people to read per se. What I see myself being engaged in is the presentation of a kind of an image that you don't see often. I see myself as showing people things, not telling people things. So where people see evidence of the civil rights imagery and things like that, like in those Mementos paintings, you saw that frieze of pictures across the top where you got Malcolm X, you got Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, you got the 4 girls that were killed in Birmingham. All of those things, they're showing you things, they're not telling you things. So the collection of imagery that's there is no narrative. Those works only seem to be narrative. They're not really narrative. So, there's a...
One of our teachers has said many times that he thinks that your life usually gets a lot easier when you start worrying about other people's problems, or your life gets better when you think about other people. And I was wondering if you're painting issues that are outside of your personal emotional life or whatever. Of course, they're related to you, but if they broaden your abilities to make paintings that you find satisfying, or if they limit, somehow I'm sure that they don't, but if you can talk a little bit about how you find the context that you're working in as like being broadening or not.
Let me see if I understand you correctly. So how do I, are my choices, do I find the choices I make have a broadening effect on what I do? Well, here's the thing. I'm going to say no. I don't find that these things provide me with a broadening effect. In fact, what I'm doing is I already feel like I feel like I'm a part of the entire planet already. So what I'm doing actually is narrowing my focus, not trying to broaden it. I'm trying to get more specific, not to get more general. So I narrow, because I think there's There's more of a necessity for specificity than there is for generalities. So, and to the degree that this notion, the personal, well, what's personal for me is to the degree that it's personal, it's to the extent that I see myself as a part of a much larger black cultural body. So when I'm making my choices of what to represent, I think these are personal to that degree that I feel like I'm a part of this larger black cultural body, but they're strategic in the sense that I'm interested in the implications of the existence of images like those in painting. And I mean that for the way people kind of consider and think about the history of painting. Because if we go back to this whole notion of what's absent in our expectations, I'm trying to transform the expectations of the new generation of people who go to the museum and are able to encounter more images like these than they would have been 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10 years ago even. So all of the choices I make as a painter have to do with my function as a professional in the field. They're driven by, the specificity of them is driven by some internalized emotional sort of beliefs and concepts. But those things are the things I use as a way of enriching the work. The personal part is not the subject of the work. The subject of the work is always the presence of a black figure in a painting, and in a certain kind of painting. That's what the subject of my work really is what does it mean for that figure to be in there, and where can that figure enter into the historical narrative of painting, first through the museum and then through a narrative articulation like any of those books. That's, if that answers your question, that's sort of what I'm seeing. So I already feel like I'm broad. I think I need to be, when I make work, I try to get narrower. So, there's a...
Hi. I've been thinking about your work in comparison to Henri Rousseau in the use of pure black pigment as a representation for blackness. But whereas in his work, I often see it as a representation of the exotic other and the fantasy and these, fantastic landscapes that he creates. How do you conceptualize that use of pure black pigment?
Well, it's a rhetorical device. Literally, it's a rhetorical device. So, and it mirrors the way, when we talk about the way we are in political terms, social and political terms, you say a black person, a white person, black is a rhetorical figure, because if you get down to the literal analysis of what I look like, my skin is sort of brown, it's not really black. But when we speak in rhetorical terms, this is where we gather where I think you maximize the kind of power that the image can project, because it moves it to the extremes. So black and white, so I don't see that girl in front row's got a white bag right next to her, but they don't look anything like the white bag, but we say we use whiteness as a kind of as part of the terminology. But that's because that's a rhetorical figure, a rhetorical device. And that's why I use black as a rhetorical device. So that the first thing you notice when you see those figures, yes, they are black. That's the first thing you have to say. And that's unequivocal, without any equivocation. And then you go on to consider all of the other things, the implications of it. Because what you notice from that is that No matter what kind of picture the figures are in, no matter what the lighting around them seems to be doing, they seem to be unaffected by any of the other colors in the environment and or the lighting in the environment. They have their own sort of, their own, well, for lack of a better word, I say, they vibrate at their own frequency, completely independent of everything else that's going on around them. So. Anybody else? Well, you can do it first.
Hi. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase the question, but in hearing your discussion of your, what was at stake for you, and I mean, you've also, you've spoken about this often, this desire to get into the museum and into the art history books. You started your project as an undergrad in 1977. I started art history in 1987. And my experience of studying art history was also looking at the canon and finding it to be flawed. But the message that I received and that I took out of sort of my college experience was, well, the issue is the canon. That what we need to do is challenge the structure of the canon, as opposed to the message that I'm hearing from you, which is what we need to do is address the inclusions and exclusions. And I'm wondering now, another 20, 30 years after, whether you have thoughts on sort of how these two projects either are being reconciled or not being reconciled, how you might change a museum or an art history book beyond the inclusions, but more at a structural level, or do we not do that?
Well, I think it is not likely that these institutional structures will change in a meaningful way anytime within our lifetimes. It is not likely. Because the apparatus that supports and sustains these institutions is, the art world is not apart from every other aspect of human interactions. It's like the economic order, the military order, the social order, the political orders. The art world is not apart from those things, but we tend to imagine ourselves as being somehow this special class of people who are doing this kind of thing on another plane. The art world is completely embedded in the overall political relationships between human beings across the planet. And so to try it, this notion that the canon can be done away with or that it can be radically revised, that's a fantasy. And it's a fantasy in part because when we arrive on the scene, like when I was born, I was born in 1955. Well, when I was born in 1955, the terms of engagement relative to the artwork were already established, were already in place. And we're still negotiating transformations that took place in the art world in 1900. Really? I mean, everything that we know from conceptual art and everything else is just an extension of transformations that were affected by Dada, by surrealism. But we're still dealing with those things. We're still dealing with the question that Duchamp posed: what constitutes the work of art? I mean, we're still playing out the end game, you could argue, relative to that. And so when I arrived on the planet, the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, all those institutions were very well established, and they are not likely to go anywhere within my lifetime, your lifetime, and the next group of people's lifetime. And they will still be used as the energizing source for maintaining the narrative history of art for as long as there are the resources that underpin the support of institutions like that. They will always be there. And so my thing is that while we're waiting, while people are waiting around for these institutions to be transformed, well, in the meantime, you're better off in there than not, because you have a greater effect by being there than not being there. And this is one of those things, for a lot of the, and this is when I was in the books, for a lot of those African American artists who reject the idea and flee from the notion that they don't want to be limited by and corralled by the sort of ideas of black artists. For all those people who say that, most of them have no presence in any narrative at all of any of these artistry conversations. And so it's like, well, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have any legitimate claims to challenge the assumptions that other artists make in terms of a strategy for being included in those narratives. So it's like, if they're not there to be considered, well, who is asking about them? Nobody. So anyway, but.
How you doing, Kerry?
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. It's always engaging. I have two questions, and I'm pensive as to which one to ask, so I don't know if I'll ask both or not, but I'll ask both. The first one is, do you feel like that you have redetermined or restructured the rules of judgment of blackness in your work?
The rules of judgment.
Right. So I think the totality of what I understand is, in your speech, is how the black figure is being judged by the viewer or by the canon when looking at your work. So in your piece, in your works, do you feel like you have restructured or redetermined those definitions of what blackness is?
Maybe I'll say no. I don't think I've. Well, I don't know if I have or not, because the thing is, like, I mean, if you go back to what I said a little while ago, that what I'm actually not interested in what people think of them. Actually, I don't care what people think about them, because I can't determine that. I can't control what people think of it. I'm only interested in that they see it. That's all. I just want you to see it. And I try to produce work that has a dynamic enough and compelling enough quality to the work that somebody in a position of authority is willing to put it in a place where it can be seen. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to do, because I think it really only operates within this particular domain. It is only within the domain of the art world and the art museum and the art history book. This is the only arena in which I am interested in the function that work can perform. I'm only interested in it being there because that's where I see, in this domain, I see an absence that I feel like I can address. So to that degree, I literally don't care what people think of the works, because like our relationship to the artwork that we encounter in the museum is not dependent on what we think of it, really. It's like I go to the museum. It's like, how much of the work in the museum, as they currently exist, how much of that work am I really interested in? 10%, 15%. But I have to deal with the rest of it, whether I'm interested in it or not, because somebody has placed it there and it's in a position where it cannot be taken out. Some other authority, I mean, we're past the point where there's an authority that can remove certain kinds of things from the museum. So there are some things that are permanently ensconced within the museum as an institution. And that has nothing to do with what you think about it, what I think about it, what anybody else thinks about it. We are forced to have to come to terms with it because the implications of the existence of that work has relevance for the narrative of art history that has been constructed already. So this is sort of how I'm thinking about things. And to the degree that, one of the things that I wanted to do with that black figure image was to undermine the comic implications of it. You know, if we take it as a kind of historical image, where that blackness has often been used to comic effect. So in the images that I do, it completely undermines the comic implications of the image, and it forces people to have to wrestle with, and this is black people as well as white people and other people, who have to wrestle with the extremeness of the blackness, which in the American context had been formulated as a problematic. So, I don't know.
Oh, the second one was, I don't know, when I look at your work, I see so many more great things than the subject, the black subject, the quality of the paint, how it's applicated. I mean, everything, it's a beautiful painting. So could you speak about what is it to be a painter and the obligation of being a painter in society?
The obligation to be a painter in society writ large. Well, you know, the obligation of the painter, the obligation is to the discipline of painting. I mean, if we mean to continue doing this thing, I don't think it's a thing that can be done lightly. And the reason for that has to do with the fact that all that history of painting behind us, I mean, that stuff is incredible. I mean, it's incredible. And so can you get in with less than that if you're going to be a painter? And this will go to, this is my pet peeve about the way art schools operate and the way painting and things like that are taught. So we have this history in which every mode of representation that is available to people who want to make paintings has already been formulated in one way or another. And so to launch people into the world of painting on the basis of some sort of personal kind of expression amounts to fraud. Because it's like here we have a discipline in which the parameters of it can be understood, and the effects of the kinds of ways in which people use paint can be easily understood. I mean, you could chart and graph and you know, you could lay it all out. And you can talk about this is one of the things that we find with modernism. And if you look at in my paintings when you're talking about all of those different things that were happening with the paint, well, we understand the language of painting and the vocabulary of the mark. And we understand what the implications of those marks in various contexts really are. And so we use them in the same way that we use the English language when we make pictures. And we should know it as thoroughly as we want to know the English language. And we know in the English language, like the bigger the vocabulary you have, the more complicated the ideas you can express. Well, in painting, it's like the more thoroughly you understand the ways in which these marks and this kind of paint and the relationships of color and harmonies and all those things, the more you understand how that works, the more complicated the pictorial issues you can represent will be. And to the degree that nobody teaches people how to understand the language of pictures and painting anymore, is to make people who graduate from school with MFAs in painting semi-literate, really. Because I know a lot of people who graduated with MFAs in painting, and the things they don't know are shocking. It's shocking. And so this is where that question that I was saying earlier, so then When you're not holding the key, it's like let's take the Human Genome Project as an example. And it's like once they cracked the human genome code, what did people start rushing in to do? Individuals who isolated various parts of the genes started to rush off and patent those genes so that they can claim ownership to them. And I was just listening to a story just the other day. There's a company that has patented a set of genes that are implicated in the development of breast cancer. And so they patented these genes because they isolated them. And under law, nobody has the right to develop a test that affects those genes. You don't have a right to even look at them unless you get permission from the company that owns the patent on those genes. And once they've completely understood the human genome and what the relationship between all those genes are and how they impact on each other, then people start figuring out what to do with them. I don't think, it's like, well, how is it that something like painting, which is even less complex, I would say, how is it that there is still a mystery around the ways in which this kind of thing functions? Why don't we understand it as thoroughly as people are trying to understand the way the human genome works? Because they're both objects, in a sense, and all objects are easily understood. And then when you start looking at the relationships between parts of those objects and other things, those things are also easily understood. And so that's the point of study, I think, when it comes to painting. And this is the obligation of the painter to society. Is to make it known exactly how these things operate and why you tend to use one approach to making a painting as opposed to another. That's the obligation, I think, of the painter. All right.
Is there any more questions? Okay, one more.
I'm wondering if you see a difference between the popular art historical narrative and the narrative that artists might discover over the course of a lifetime. I feel like a lot of the artists over my lifetime that have ended up meaning the most to me exist either on the periphery of the popular art historical narrative or either totally outside of it.
Well, but part of that goes to individual preferences. But I think the thing that matters the most is the impact they have on. This is the best way I think I can put it. I mean, and it's a mirror of the way the culture and the society we live in is structured. The United States claims to be a democracy, but what we really are is a representative republic. So that the individual, as we always make these claims on the primacy of the individual, but it's not really the individual who decides, it's the representative who decides. And so in the art world, yes, you can have a lot of people on the periphery who you are particularly interested in, but they don't serve as representatives of the capacity of a form to be articulated a certain kind of way. And so if you look at the narrative of art history, what art history is, it's established it's established on the principle of representatives. And the people that we read about in art history are there because they represent what we can see as significant changes in the concept of what kinds of things can and cannot be works of art. It doesn't really matter how many other people did one or two interesting things. It's like the one-hit wonders on the radio. Yeah, there are a lot of people who made one good one-hit record, but in the grand scheme of things, how important is that?
But do you think that there's like almost like a class of artists that have been carried on for generations just by artists and not by the institutions?
I don't know. Who would they be?
Robert Colescott. I mean, I feel like there are a number of artists that were not necessarily recognized in their time by the institutions, but were recognized by other artists. They were almost like artists.
Well, but I think you have to look more closely at that, because Robert Colescott was not suffering from a lack of attention, really. But you got to look at you got to look again at what Robert Colescott actually did. And there's a way in which what Robert Colescott did, like in some ways what I did as an artist, was to bring a black subjectivity to the narrative of painting that was already existing. And all you have to do is look at the paintings Colescott makes, the subjects. I mean, they're almost all based on already existing paintings from the historical record. Almost all of them. So, and the only thing what transforms those work is that he introduces a black subject into the position that was formerly occupied by a white subject. So, and to what degree is that significant, and to whom? You know, I don't know that painting can do different things. Does my understanding of what painting can do change with Robert Colescott? I don't think so. But it's not the same as, let's say, if we go to somebody like Malevich, or you could say Jackson Pollock, or you could say you could take conceptual artists like Seth Siegelaub and all those first generation conceptual artists. It's like or Duchamp even. It's like at the moment the ready-made entered into the discourse of art, that changed our concept of what could and couldn't be a work of art. At the moment that Impressionist painting entered into the discourse of painting, it changed people's expectations of what constituted a finished painting. It's like the ways in which you think about what kinds of things can be what they are, that changes things. And in conceptual art, the moment people walked into an art gallery and they saw an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper tacked to the wall with typewritten text on it where they thought they were supposed to see a painting, that changed people's concept of what kinds of things constituted works of art. Those things are more meaningful than the introduction of a black figure into a picture that used to have nothing but white people in it. I mean, that's more meaningful, really, in terms of the overall trajectory of where the art world is going. Now, Colescott was significant to me. It's like when I saw the Robert Colescott painting, the George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware on the cover of Art Forum magazine back in 1996 or so, that meant something to me. But I think there are a lot of people for whom that didn't mean anything at all. And in particular, you could say it didn't mean anything at all to Yves Allenbois. It didn't mean anything at all to Rosalind Krauss. It didn't mean anything at all to Hal Foster. It didn't mean anything at all to Benjamin Buclot. It didn't mean anything to any of those people. And those people have more authority to establish the terms under which we engage the idea of art history. They have more authority than anybody. And there's nobody who was able to write about Robert Colescott's work who could write about it with the same kind of force and authority that those writers wrote about the things that they were interested in. And what we have to come to terms with, though, is that, and this is why I take the strategic approach that I do, that human beings have been and always will be in competition with each other. This is what human beings do. And you can surrender your capacity to compete, or you can get in the game and try to go toe-to-toe with whoever seems to represent the highest level of achievement in the field at the time. And in order to do that, you have to be able to identify where the top is. And if we think in the art world that it's so individual-driven, that it's so subjective, if we think that, then we are starting out with a losing strategy from the get-go. But if you look at the way art history is structured like everything else around series of agreements. And it's at the point where these agreements are made, that's where you have to sort of understand what's relevant in the art world. Because it's like, you will never pick up an art history book that doesn't have Jackson Pollock in it. You will never pick up one that doesn't have Willem de Kooning in it. You will never pick up one that doesn't have Mark Roscoe in it. You will never pick up a book that doesn't have Ed Reinhardt in it. You will never pick up one that doesn't have Manet, Monet, Lautrec, Degas. You will never pick up a book that doesn't have those people in it. A book that purports to tell you about the overarching value of the art world. You will never pick up a book that doesn't have Warhol, Jasper Johns, Rauschenberg. You will never pick up a book that doesn't have those people in it. So what do you have to, in order to change that dynamic, how much energy do you have to invest and how much force do you have to project it with in order to displace that and even to expand it? I mean, if you just were following the news, you know, they just sort of started up again the Hebron Collider in Switzerland. It's like the amount of energy they had to put into that, I mean, to accelerate those particles at the speed that they needed to in order to produce the effects, the information they wanted. The amount of energy that's required to do that is absolutely tremendous. And you know how much further from the atomic bomb that is? This is, to me, this is what's at stake. I mean, it's how do you get to understand, I mean, what are they trying to understand? They're trying to understand the fundamental principles of the existence of matter itself. And if you find that, what will you be able to do? The same thing is true in the art world, I think. To me, that's the level of investment and the level of energy you have to bring to it to making your work as a painter. And so with all of that stuff that I've done and that I showed in those slides, I have arrived nowhere, really. Because it's like in all of that, all of that stuff is only so that I can do something else next. That's none of those things. So anyway, I'm done. Thank you.